Okay, so today we are going to do lesson number 5 in the Earth Body series, and we're going to focus on the geodynamo, the geomagnetic shield, and our own personal what is called a Y-chi field. That is your outer chi field that keeps you from getting ill. So what we're going to do is we'll start with a little stick work just to warm up a little bit. And then I'm going to show you a series of videos. I think they're maybe about a half hour. There's 4 or 5 little videos, about a half hour total. And I'm sorry, I have not had time to do this in a really coherent way. So I'm just going to show the videos and through screen share and talk over them. And then we will do a Qigong exercise for building your Yi-Chi field, your protective field. Qi, you guys know what Qi means. Y means outside or outer. So you're talking about your outer immune system. To keep the booger man away, right? Annie says hi. She is doing better. She is resting comfortably. She will probably be in bed for a few days here before she really gets up and gets going. But she's past uh, the acute stage anyway, and she's feeling okay. She's not in any pain or anything. Okay, so let's start with some stick work just to warm up a little bit. Genevieve, I have to ask you where you are because your background looks really interesting.
I'm in San Francisco Airport.
Oh, okay. Well, why don't you put it on broadcast and let's see whether we can get the crowds involved. And the other side. Lee circles. And reverse. And shoe circles. And reverse. And pink circles. And reverse. And reverse. and reverse. Okay, you can put away your sticks. Okay, so hopefully you remember from last time that there are movements of the Earth's outer core, which is quite large. It's about the size of the planet Mars, and it's liquid, and it's a combination of liquid iron and liquid nickel, and a few other little things mixed in. And it moves in spirals. And when liquid iron moves in spirals and there's an energy flow across it, it will create a magnetic field. So where does the energy come from? Well, it comes from the core itself. The core of the Earth is as hot as the surface of the sun. So energy is radiating out from that core all the time, and it goes through these liquid iron spirals, and that creates the magnetic field of the Earth, which, as you probably know already, but you will see shortly, without which there would be no life on this planet, no life at all, not even microcosmic. There would be no water, there would be no atmosphere. It would be like the planet Mars. It would just be a completely barren desert. So it is a pretty remarkable thing that we happen to have this geomagnetic shield that shields us from solar radiation, which would wipe us out. Now, not in one day. It would take tens of thousands of years. But when it was done, there wouldn't be anything left. However, the geomagnetic field is not, it's not like you switch it on and it just stays on continuously. It fluctuates because the geodynamo in the center of the Earth that I just described is very liquid and it's moving all the time. So one of several things is usually going on all the time. It's always changing because it's liquid. It moves around inside the Earth. So for instance, our North Pole, which used to be in northern Canada, has moved 1,000 miles during my lifetime. Now that 1,000 miles happens to bring it up closer to the rotational pole of the Earth, which is nice. But you got to wonder, why is the magnetic pole moving 1,000 miles in the space of a single lifetime? That's a very fast movement. And by the way, that geomagnetic pole is the south geomagnetic pole, which is now next to the north geographic pole. Another thing that can happen is sometimes the geomagnetic field pulses, and it will pulse in different ways around the planet, and this pulse can go on for millions of years. And very strange things happen across the face of the earth when that happens. So that's something that might be beginning to happen. Another thing that can happen is the magnetic poles can switch because the inner dynamo of the earth that I just described is like a magnet. So the South Pole's on the top and the North Pole's on the bottom. It just happens to be that way at the moment. But historically, we know from the rock record that that switches, and it switches roughly on an average of about 300,000 years, but that's just an average. There have been times when it has stayed where it is for millions of years, and other times where within 10,000 years it switches a couple times. So it's completely random. There is some evidence that we might be moving into a polar switch era, which wouldn't be surprising. Because it's been about 700,000 years since the poles switched. A switch takes roughly between 2 or 3,000 and 5 to 10,000 years. So it's nothing that's going to happen in our lifetimes, probably. But what's interesting about it is while it switches, as it goes through this long switch over thousands of years, it breaks up into mini poles. So instead of one North Pole, there might be 5 or 6 North Poles. Instead of one South Pole, there might be 5 or 6 South Poles. And they, at least from our point of view, appear to be just randomly situated around the Earth. So that will be a very interesting time for sciences. Right? How's GPS going to work? How are satellites going to work, et cetera, et cetera? How is your Boy Scout compass going to work? It will be very interesting. If we have time, I'm gonna play a video about one of the very peculiar events that happened in the geomagnetic field 42,000 years ago. And they know that it happened. What's interesting about it is to correlate it with things that happened in the living world. Now, correlation is not causation. Nevertheless, it's a little suspicious. So let me I've got these queued out. Let me play these. And I will kind of talk over them a little bit. I think not a huge amount. And when we're done, I'm going to lead you guys in an exercise to work on your own. This is a Qigong exercise to work on your own immune system. It's a very, in a way, a very simple exercise, but it's very powerful. All right. So make yourselves comfortable.
Hidden Magnetic Portals Around Earth, presented by Science at NASA. A favorite theme of science fiction is the portal, an extraordinary opening in space or time that connects travelers to distant realms. A good portal is a shortcut,
This is the
a
wrong
guide,
video.
a door into the
This looks like a very interesting video, but I think what happened is I skipped over it.
Earth's magnetosphere. Presented by Science at NASA. Enveloping our planet and protecting us from the fury of the sun is a giant bubble of magnetism called the magnetosphere. It deflects most of the solar material sweeping towards us from our star at 1 million miles per hour or more. Without the magnetosphere, The relentless action of these solar particles could strip the Earth of its protective layers, which shield us from the sun's ultraviolet radiation. It's clear that this magnetic bubble was key to helping Earth develop into a habitable planet. Compare Earth to Mars, a planet that lost its magnetosphere about 4.2 billion years ago. The solar wind is thought to have stripped away most of Mars's atmosphere, possibly after the red planet's magnetic field dissipated. This has left Mars as the stark, barren world we see today through the eyes of NASA orbiters and rovers. By contrast, Earth's magnetosphere seems to have kept our atmosphere protected. Eftahia Zesta of the Geospace Physics Laboratory at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center notes, if there were no magnetic field, we might have a very different atmosphere left, without life as we know it. Understanding our magnetosphere is a key element to helping scientists someday forecast space weather that can affect Earth's technology. Extreme space weather events can disrupt communications networks, GPS navigation, and electrical power grids. The magnetosphere is a permeable shield.
So, I want to look at that a second again.
The sun's magnetic field is about to...
I don't know why it keeps doing this. I'm sorry, guys.
Miles per hour or more radiation. It's clear that this planet's magnetic field dissipated. This has left Mars as the stark, barren world we see today through the eyes of NASA orbiters and rovers. By contrast, Earth's magnetosphere seems to have kept our atmosphere protected. Eftahia Zesta of the Geospace Physics Laboratory at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center notes, if there were no magnetic field, we might have a very different atmosphere left, without life as we know it. Understanding our magnetosphere is a key element to helping scientists someday forecast space weather that can affect Earth's technology. Extreme space weather events can disrupt communications networks, GPS navigation, and electrical power grids.
What I wanted to do is look at the depiction of the geomagnetics. You see all these spirals? It's all spirals, guys. All right, and here it is right around the Earth. Oh, for Christ's sakes.
The solar wind. The corona is the sun's inner atmosphere.
Okay, let's go on to the next one. I don't know why it keeps doing that.
Thanks to Brilliant for sponsoring today's video. If I were to tell you that the cycles of the sun could affect your entire life, you might think that I was suddenly taking a turn away from astronomy and into astrology. While there are many people in the world who believe that you can learn things about your future by studying the position of stars and planets, it's not a position I tend to take. When you think about the North Pole, you don't expect it to go anywhere. And you certainly don't expect it to change places with the South Pole. That would just be wrong. Our magnetic compasses would all point the wrong way. We'd need to update our maps. Birds would probably be horribly confused. And yet, although they sound like something out of science fiction, geomagnetic reversals like this are real. They've happened before. And the process behind it might be a lot more dangerous than you'd think. To be clear, it's not the reversals themselves that are potentially dangerous, it's the buildup. During those times, the Earth's magnetic field, the shield around our planet that keeps us safe from deadly solar radiation, will drop to as low as 10% of its current strength, leading one group of scientists in 2021 to predict climate shifts and mass extinctions, and others to describe satellites being destroyed, electrical grids going offline, and deadly radiation raining down on us for hundreds or even thousands of years. This is troubling when you consider that we are a couple of 100,000 years overdue for our next geomagnetic reversal, and based on fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field that scientists are detecting right now, the build-up to a geomagnetic reversal may even have begun already. Which begs the question, should we be worried? I'm Alex McColgan, and you're watching Astrum. Join with me today as we explore the science behind geomagnetic reversals and find out whether the next one will be an apocalyptic scenario or whether it'll lead to nothing more than a few lost birds. What truly happens when things go south? Let's start by trying to understand where the Earth's magnetic field comes from in the first place. It's not a given that our planet would have a magnetic field. The two planets flanking us, Mars and Venus, do not have one, and yet the Earth does, which is a good thing, as without one, there is a very real chance life would not have been able to arise here in the first place. Thanks to the protective cocoon of this field, deadly solar radiation is deflected away from the planet's surface, allowing things to flourish without all that radiation breaking down our DNA, causing mutations and cancers. Scientists are still trying to figure out all the particulars of why certain planets have fields and certain others don't, but the current leading theory is that the Earth's core acts as a giant dynamo.
So if you guys remember from last time, this is the depiction of the spirals inside the Earth's geodynamo in the center. So the center of the Earth is radiating heat outward, and the iron core is moving in big spirals, and that creates the geodynamo, that creates the magnetic field.
When I started my Milankovitch cycles video with a reference to Game of Thrones, I didn't realize.
What the?
When you think about the North Pole, you don't expect it to go anywhere. And you certainly don't expect it to change place. It's a principle of physics that you can use electrical fields to create magnetic ones, and vice versa. This is the principle that power plants work under. Moving a magnet through a coil of wires causes electrical current to start to flow, as that changing magnetic field exerts a force on the electrons present there. But similarly, the motion of electrons creates a magnetic field to form in perpendicular circles around the direction of motion, in accordance with Faraday's law of induction. But the way this applies to the Earth's core is a delicate, complicated process. To start with, our core needs to be at least partially liquid, which fortunately is true. Above the solid inner core that lies at the heart of our planet is a liquid outer core, where the pressure isn't quite high enough to keep things in a solid state. It's very hot in the outer core though, 6,000 degrees Celsius at its warmest point, so hot that it rivals the surface temperature of the Sun, which, when combined with the lower pressure compared to the inner core, is more than enough to keep the iron and nickel that makes it up flowing down there. The temperature drops as you move away from the center of the Earth. This gets circulation going. Hot, conductive material from the warmer, deeper regions of the outer core rises, then cools, then falls again, creating loops and currents of flowing material. Our electrical field starts to be generated. But if there are many of these flowing loops, which in theory there would be, why does Earth only have one North Pole and one South Pole? Surely the created magnetic fields would be all over the place. Well, there is thought to be an extra force at play that takes all these fields and unifies them, pointing them in the same direction. This force is thought to be the Coriolis effect. Dynamo theory states that the Coriolis effect causes these flows of iron to not rise and fall as straight lines, but as spirals. The spinning of the Earth causes them to gently be spun in turn, creating giant springs. As each segment of each spring is creating a magnetic field in a circle around it, the net result is that the inside of these springs creates a solid, unified field that all moves in the same direction upwards, while the outside brings that magnetic field looping back down again and back in to the bottom of the coil. In short, it creates the well-known magnetic dipole north and south that we see today. However, if there's anything that you should take away from this, it's that this process is precarious, as it is based on a lot of liquid iron essentially just sloshing around, which is not very consistent. Our magnetic field thus has little fluctuations and wobbles all the time. We see this in different ways, but a big one is that our North Pole is constantly moving. Since scientists began keeping track of it in 1831, the North Pole has gradually shifted about 1,100 kilometers, leaving its original location in Canada and moving up towards Siberia. Its rate of motion is also increasing, going from 16 kilometers a year to roughly 55 kilometers a year. A big jump. This might still be akin to just the momentary wobbles of a spinning top though. Yes, it deviates somewhat, but it always remains roughly upright. That's a far cry from a complete reversal. However, scientists are certain that such reversals have happened before. They even have a specific number, 183 times in the last 83 million years. How do they know? The answer lies locked in our Earth's surface iron. When magma erupts from the Earth's mantle, it can contain small amounts of iron. As these can move freely in the molten magma, they tend to orient themselves in the direction of the Earth's magnetic field. However, scientists noticed that there were layers of geological history where the iron was pointing one way and layers where it was pointing in the reverse direction. Their explanation? The entire pole of the planet had flipped. On average, these flips seem to happen every 450,000 years, although the last few have only got 300,000 year gaps between them. Comparatively, it's been 750,000 years since the last reversal. You might think that we're overdue for one, and some have made that claim. However, scientists have found that there's little rhyme or reason to the timing of these flips. One of the longest gaps between flips took place in the Cretaceous period, and it lasted 40 million years. The record holder, the Kierman reverse superchron, was 312 to 262 million years ago, 50 million years with no reversal. Scientists are still trying to understand what causes these flips. However, the current theory is that something, perhaps some interplay between the mantle and the outer core, causes a fluctuation in the core spinning. This disrupts the spiraling shapes of the core's flow, breaking them down. The magnetic field of the Earth stops being unified and generally becomes a sprawling mess, fighting against itself. Several poles might temporarily arise during this period of shifting magnetic confusion. While in time things settle down and the spirals reassert themselves, it seems random as to which way they will do this, meaning about half the time our magnetic North Pole reappears over the geographical south. This reasserting can take 1,000 to 10,000 years. Alright, but would that really be the end of the world? Why does this matter? Well, during that period before the poles reassert themselves, our Earth's magnetic field drops to as low as 10% of its current strength. In theory, this could leave us much more vulnerable to all the solar radiation space throws at us. We could see auroras reaching much further south during that time. Skin cancer rates would increase. Our satellites would find themselves with not enough shielding. Radiation would fry their circuits, causing them to malfunction, shut down, and potentially even slowly fall from orbit. Our electrical grid would be much more vulnerable to solar storms, which could lead to large segments of the Earth's population without power. With no electricity or satellite communication, it would be a devastating blow to our global civilization. It could be worse than that. A research team from the University of New South Wales in Sydney even linked one of the most recent weakenings of the magnetic field, the Lachamps event, a temporary 800-year wobble rather than a full flip, to megafaunal mass extinctions in Australia, including the deaths of Diprotodon, giant Australian wombats, and Procoptodon goliath, giant kangaroos. Temporary wobbles like this are known as geomagnetic excursions rather than full reversals, and they happen over much shorter time frames. their transition periods can last as little as 200 years rather than 10,000, which can be much more difficult for species to adapt to. In their 2021 study, they argued that there was a spike in atmospheric radiocarbon levels caused by the collapse of the Earth's magnetic field, indicating climate shifts that could have led to these extinctions. The timing lines up uncomfortably. But how real are these risks? Honestly, it's a mixed bag. A point in our favor is that other than this recent study, there is no indication that magnetic field reversals have ever coincided with mass extinction events. It seems like many reversals have come and gone without affecting animal or plant life at all. And even in this study, such mass extinctions seem to have been limited in scope. There is no claim from the researchers that this was a global phenomenon. Other parts of the world remained unaffected, even during the Lachamps event. It seems that a perfect storm might have been in play, where specific conditions over Australia left it more vulnerable to solar radiation. In terms of our global society, it's worth noting that these magnetic changes would take many lifetimes to complete, even at their fastest. This would be slow enough that we could come to terms with our new reality. If our satellites don't have enough shielding, we would have time to build some that were better protected. If solar radiation becomes a larger risk, we could remain indoors more. Sun cream might become more powerful to mitigate the dangers of cancers, if not remove them entirely. And according to NASA, even if our field were to significantly weaken, it's not like we would be left without protection. Our atmosphere itself can catch radiation, meaning that we would remain safe from solar winds and cosmic radiation, at least to some degree. It would take far longer than 10,000 years for our atmosphere's ozone to be stripped away. But I would be surprised if there wasn't at least some turmoil, at least while we adjusted to living under a reduced magnetic field. Big changes to how a society operates are always painful. And this isn't entirely hypothetical. Did you know the Earth's magnetic field has been steadily weakening for the last 200 years? It would take another 1,300 years for it to vanish completely, so there's plenty of time for it to stop its current downward trend, and there's no reason to think this isn't just a temporary wobble. But on top of that, there is also the South Atlantic anomaly to consider, a section of the Earth's magnetic field that is already showing signs of significant weakening that covers most of the space around South America and the neighboring ocean. This zone might not influence life on the ground, but is dangerous enough that it has fried satellites and threatened astronauts. The Hubble telescope has to turn itself off every time it flies through it. Imagine that, but across the entire globe. That's what we might expect while the poles are reversing. Concerningly, the South Atlantic anomaly has been growing continuously since we started keeping track of it, possibly suggesting the approach of either another geomagnetic wobble like the Lachamps event, or that a full-blown reversal is already upon us. If it happens, it won't likely be something that ends civilization as we know it. But if the study about Australian megafauna is correct, it isn't going to be without impact either. Species could die. Humans will have to accommodate a very different, more hazardous space environment. It's interesting to learn about geomagnetic reversals and their potential impacts on the planet, but while we are not likely to see one happen in our lifetimes, for the generations of humanity after us, this might turn out to be a lot less hypothetical. They might be seeing it firsthand. Scientists spend a lot of time and resources trying to check on the health and well-being of our Earth's magnetic field, for good reason. And yet, on a day-to-day level, in all the hectic rush of living, we sometimes forget to spend time and effort checking in on our own mental well-being. Talking to someone is one of the most important things you can do for yourself.
We're going to be talking about magnetic reversals. And here we're actually talking about this one particular study that came out not so long ago that suggests something really horrible happened to our planet approximately 42,000 years ago, during the period that sometimes is referred to as the Adams period, or Adams transitional event, named after the science fiction writer Douglas Adams, who famously had this thing about the number 42. 42 was the answer to everything. But despite this being a somewhat cute reference to this event, it may have actually caused serious disruptions on our planet, including several extinction events. As a matter of fact, this paper also suggests that the extinction events on our planet, including the extinctions of Neanderthals and a lot of other species on the planet, might have been correlated with this event that's definitely going to happen again. So let's talk about this, and let's discuss what exactly happened 42,000 years ago. And as you might have already guessed from the title of the video, all of this relates to the magnetic poles of our planet. Here we're talking about the occasional magnetic reversals when the North Pole becomes the South Pole, that is, the magnetic North becomes the magnetic South, and vice versa. For example, in one of the previous videos, we've talked about this simulation that established that during the reversal, a lot of really hectic things happen to our planet, resulting in the magnetosphere that's not really that strong. This lasts for anywhere from a few hundred to a few thousand years, and after this, the poles become reversed and the South becomes the North. There are actually a lot of studies analyzing these reversal events from the past, and we've already established that they do happen roughly around every 300,000 years or so, but they're also kind of random in some way. So in that sense, we're kind of overdue for the next event, and technically it should have happened a few 100,000 years ago, but since we have no idea how the mechanism of these events works and what exactly causes them, well, we cannot really predict the next one. But the reversal events are actually slightly different from the excursion events. Excursion events are a lot more frequent. Unlike a magnetic reversal, an excursion event is usually temporary, and it essentially results in the sudden weakening of the magnetic field with even more chaos and a lot more unpredictable variation of magnetic lines, where suddenly things become very different from how they were for thousands and thousands of years. This can last, once again, anywhere from a few hundred to a few thousand years, but in the end results in the magnetic fields returning back to where they were. The magnetic north is still the same magnetic north. But as I mentioned, the magnetic excursion events are a lot more frequent, and the last such event to happen, the one that we studied quite a lot, is known as the Lachamp excursion event, or simply Lachamp event. The unusual event that started about 42 to maybe 43,000 years ago that suddenly lowered the magnetic field of our planet for roughly around 400 years or possibly as long as 1,000 years. This simulation you see right here shows you in pink and in red colors how the magnetic field was lowered in certain regions of the planet and how it then strengthened after just a few thousand years. Now this particular event is really interesting because it's definitely one of the most studied magnetic events on our planet, and it's also the one that's the most easy to study. We have a lot of different sources available, including rocks and including different deposits, but also trees, and specifically different types of trees that have actually preserved a lot of information in terms of collecting data of carbon-14 and beryllium-10 presence, which normally is correlated with higher radiations on the planet. Now, here's the thing though. We know that this event definitely happened, and we know that this event affected certain parts of the planet more than others. This simulation here actually presents this quite accurately. Certain regions were not as affected, but certain regions in Europe and regions in Australia and New Zealand were affected quite a lot. So in other words, this wasn't really a true reversal, this was an excursion event when the magnetic lines weakened, creating the conditions where the entire magnetosphere of the planet was about 5 to 10% the total strength that we have today, and this lasted for several centuries. Now naturally, if something like this were to
Oh, it's too fast for me.
Try this.
happen today, we would be in a lot of trouble. We do have a lot of similar examples of this happening on Earth already. For example, here's the image taken by ESA last year that shows us this relatively large hole, you could call it, although technically it's known as the South Atlantic anomaly, that represents a relatively weakened magnetic field that does affect certain objects in orbit of our planet. And the best example of how this affects satellites is from the Hitomi spacecraft that was used by the Japanese Space Agency for several years, until it started experiencing unusual glitches after passing through the anomaly several times. And this basically, at least unofficially, destroyed the satellite over time. So we know that without the magnetic field to protect our planet, the satellite technology and a lot of aerospace related industries are going to be basically impossible to maintain. Even flying in an airplane is going to become extremely dangerous. And so this magnetic anomaly is a really good example for how dangerous all of this can be if one day another excursion starts to occur. But what exactly happened 42,000 years ago? Well, the reason this event is known as the Lachamp excursion is actually because of the place where the original signs of it were discovered. This was in a place called Clermont-Ferrand in France, and it was actually a discovery of different deposits in lava rock that allowed the scientists to study the strength of magnetosphere for essentially several hundred years during that period. But another recent discovery came from another region on the planet using something entirely different, using very ancient trees from New Zealand. The trees that you see right here are known as the kauri, and there's quite a lot of them that have been preserved in ancient bogs from New Zealand that allow us to basically make a cross-section and then find out what was happening to those trees during that period by studying each individual ring. Some of these trees are actually really ancient and some of them grow to be gigantic, so they're basically a perfect specimen for studying what was happening during those periods. And just as expected, the trees did contain elevated levels of carbon-14 and beryllium-10, indicating that a lot of radiation was reaching our planet, and these trees were essentially bombarded by a tremendous amount of ultraviolet light, tremendous amount of radiation in general, for hundreds and hundreds of years, for over 400 years actually. And although previous studies that used ice cores from Greenland that were around the same age didn't actually discover anything specific or unusual about the climate during those periods, this once again can be actually explained through the idea of excursions being somewhat localized in how they affect the planet. Certain regions do not get affected as much as other regions. And because of this, certain regions become more climatically affected by certain things than, for example, a region that's on the other side of the planet. But the question is, of course, how did this really affect the planet? And this is where the scientists in this paper look at some of the other events that may have happened around this time and essentially correlate this with several major events that did occur around the same region around the same time. Specifically, the sudden disappearance of megafauna. A large amount of Australian megafauna, or essentially these really large animals that used to exist in Australia and New Zealand, more or less suddenly vanished around the same time. Sometimes it's actually quoted as around 46,000 years ago, but certain studies discover it to be closer to about 42,000 years ago. Now naturally this is a correlation, not a causation, but a very interesting correlation nevertheless. It has been actually speculated that maybe it was the result of human overhunting them, but the disappearance was extremely sudden, and it's also assumed that humans have arrived to this region about 10,000 years prior to their disappearance, so it wouldn't really make sense. But what's even more interesting is that the implication in this paper is that the excursion was also probably responsible for the extinction of our cousins, the Neanderthals. We know that the Neanderthals also have suddenly gone extinct roughly around 40,000 years ago. Now, it previously has been implied that this was maybe a result of some sort of a competition with humans, basically with us, but the proof for this was never really there. As a matter of fact, in the last couple of years, pretty much most of the studies started to imply that the Neanderthals have actually gone extinct because of the climate change. And this paper specifically makes a very strong case for it, correlating the excursion event and the various effects that it might have created on the planet with the extinction of Neanderthals and a lot of other species on the planet. And so this of course implies that the excursion event had some major biological effects on the biosphere of our planet. A lot of species might have actually not survived the event, and species that did survive it might have been affected by it in some other ways. But the most interesting correlation that they present in this paper is something that actually kind of surprised me. It's in regards to what happened to us. They actually discovered that around the same time our ancestors started to create a lot of these really interesting cave paintings using this very unusual red dye known as the red ochre. It actually did appear very suddenly around this time, around 42,000 years ago, and was found to be displayed in various caves around the planet. It just so happens that the modern humans still use red ochre for something here on the planet. It's actually used as a kind of a sunscreen by certain tribes in Africa. The actual name is Ogizi, which is exactly what it's called. Probably not. Anyway, that's what a lot of tribes in Namibia still use today to protect themselves from the dangerous effects of the sun and from basically being burned by the ultraviolet radiation. And you might kind of already see where I'm going with this. It looks like 42,000 years ago, when the magnetic field weakened and when a lot of radiation started to reach our planet, and very likely also started to decrease the ozone layer as well, the amount of UV light on the planet also increased dramatically. This obviously would cause things to burn pretty easily. UV light is pretty damaging to a lot of different cells, and because of this, maybe ancient humans discovered the secret weapon, the ability to protect themselves from the UV light, which allowed them to kind of survive and to thrive afterwards. We don't really know if this is exactly what happened, but it is kind of implied in the study. But because the atmosphere was so ionized, it also very likely changed the climate completely. There was a lot of lightning, a lot of storms, a lot of different conditions that simply do not exist today, so the entire night skies probably looked very different from how it is today. And for all we know, maybe because of all of these crazy conditions outside, including lightning strikes, very powerful sun, and a lot of radiation coming from everywhere, the humans decided to stick around the caves a lot more frequently, thus allowing them to basically create these paintings that we later found. None of this is of course a fact yet, but the implications coming from the study and the analysis performed in the study are nevertheless very interesting. But that's all cool and all. How does it actually affect us? Well, it just so happens that we don't really know when the next excursion is going to happen. Some people have already started to speculate that we're sort of headed there. As a matter of fact, if you look at the total strength of the magnetic field, it looks like it kind of weakened in the last century or so. It actually is about 10% weaker than it was roughly around 200 years ago. At the same time, we have this new thing going on with the magnetic north suddenly moving extremely fast. So fast, as a matter of fact, that the scientists had to recalculate their previous assumption about how fast it's moving. You can actually see this right here with the modeled prediction versus the observed motion of the magnetic field, showing us how far and how quickly it has already moved just in these 5 years. There's currently no actual explanation for what's happening with the magnetic north, but some people have already implied that maybe this is what's going to happen in the next few hundreds of years. Maybe, just maybe, we are actually headed toward an excursion event. And if we are to learn anything from the past, from the event 42,000 years ago, and also from the effects we've already observed with the anomaly in the south that has already destroyed at least one satellite, this is something that we might want to kind of start preparing for just in case. We don't really know if this is exactly what's happening or if it's going to affect us in any way, but it would probably kind of help us to be a little bit more prudent. We know that the magnetic field is essential for our planet, so the sudden decrease in the magnetic field might actually affect us quite a lot. Luckily for us, we already have several different papers also suggesting how we can potentially create artificial magnetic field. But that's something we'll talk about in one of the future videos. On that note, thank you so much for watching, subscribe if you still haven't, share this with someone who loves learning about space and sciences, and maybe come back tomorrow to learn something else. Also, maybe support this channel on Patreon by joining the channel membership or by buying the Wonderful Person t-shirt you can find in the description below. Either way, stay wonderful.
Okay, sorry for all the technical screw-ups. This is why I like to I download the videos I want to see, I edit them, I put them together in one thing so we don't have those problems, but I just didn't have time to do that this time. So we'll do it for a future thing. You know, this first time for me, this first time through Earth Body, Your Body is definitely like a first draft of something. And it's pretty rough, but we'll get there. Okay, so I was going to show you a picture of the individual's magnetic field too, because you've got a magnetic field or a chi field, and it's shaped exactly like the one for the Earth. So they're also looking at you as a kind of magnet, with one pole being up at the ba wei at the top of the head, and the other pole being at the hui yin at the base of the spine. And you are generating this field all around. And as long as that field is strong, you are at least somewhat protected from the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. But of course, that field fluctuates because sometimes you're not feeling really good, or there may be some environmental insult that comes at you. You got to deal with it, and you need to strengthen your own magnetosphere, your own protective shield. So I'm going to teach you a qigong for that. This is really powerful. We'll just spend 5 minutes on this, and we'll do more of it in the qigong classes during the week here. All right. So you take your palms and face them toward the earth. and you start to absorb chi energy from the earth. All right, and let me come up closer to the mirror here. And then you join your hands together with the thumbs touching. All right, the thumbs touching is the lung connection. All right, and then the index fingers touching. That's for your big colon. All right, and then you breathe the energy out of the earth, all right? As you come up to your lungs, breathe in, breathe in, breathe in, and then breathe out. All right? You're breathing all the boogers out. All right? And then you open, and as you open, you breathe in again, and you absorb energy from the cosmos as well as from the earth, right? Coming in here, breathe in, and then breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. And breathe in energy from the earth up into the lungs, and then breathe out any boogers. And breathe in energy from the cosmos and the earth, and breathe out. Okay, I don't know about you guys, but that really works for me. It really oxygenates the body. It grounds you. And what you're doing is energetically cleaning out the colon and the lungs, especially, because that's the place where stuff can come into your body that's kind of negative. So you're you're not worrying about it physically, but energetically cleansing the intestines, cleansing the lungs, blow it out. Right. And then breathe in good, clean chi from heaven and from earth, and focus it into the body, into the intestines. Again, clean, blow it out. Anyway, so any thoughts? Jill, did you like that exercise?
Yes, I did like the exercise.
Good. Catherine, any thoughts? Good? Good. Jack? Okay, we got thumbs up. So, again, I'm sorry it was a little discombobulated watching it, but I guess that's what happens as you start to create this stuff. I found that really interesting that we might be going into a geomagnetic excursion. That's a really interesting thought because it can happen much more quickly than the reversal of the poles. However, those videos focus on how can I say, the catastrophic aspect of this kind of thing. I didn't have time to show you a video that was about a reversal 500 million years ago that probably led to the evolutionary transition from single-celled organism to multicellular organisms. Now, so the Ediacaran era, if you've heard of the Ediacaran flora and fauna, that was the point when we went from little single-celled bacteria to the first multicellular animals in the ocean. And that was associated, there's no proof, but that was associated with about a 30 million year period when the geomagnetic shield went down to about 5 to 10% of its current value. So it was letting a lot of stuff come in. And what happened when all that happened is it allowed oxygen to accumulate in the earth and in the oceans. And it was that oxygen that allowed multicellular animals to happen, besides which the additional radiation was causing mutations that probably led to multicellular life. So although it might be a really tough way to go, it actually has very positive connotations for evolution of life on Earth. Jill, you look like you want to say something.
I'm imagining super beings being produced in the next
the next go round, right?
yes.
Well, I hope so. I hope they're a little more super than some of us are. Okay, guys, we're going to do Tai Chi class, but give me 15 minutes here to reconvigorate myself. So we'll see you in a few minutes.